The label head looked at the sheet music. Then he looked at Louis Armstrong across the table. Then he said no. The silence in the room was heavy, a thick, suffocating thing that seemed to press against the walls. He said Armstrong was 66 years old. He said the market for this kind of song, from this kind of artist, did not exist in 1967. He said the kids buying records right now were not going to buy Louis Armstrong singing about roses and skies. He said it with the cold, sterile confidence of a man who understood the business, or at least the part of the business that lived and died by quarterly projections and demographic charts. He saw an asset that had depreciated, a brand that had lost its currency in the frantic, psychedelic shift of the late 60s. He didn't see the humanity in the ink. He only saw the potential for a commercial failure that he wanted no part of. Armstrong recorded it anyway. The song was called "What a Wonderful World." Bob Thiele, a producer at ABC Paramount, had brought it to Armstrong in the fall of 1967, a melody and lyrics by George David Weiss, written specifically with Armstrong's voice in mind. Thiele believed in it completely. He heard the warmth, the gravity, the singular power of a man who had seen the world change a dozen times over. Larry Newton, the head of ABC Records, did not. Newton's refusal to promote the record was not a subtle thing. It was a deliberate abandonment. When it was released in the United States, he essentially did nothing. No promotional push, no radio campaign, no energetic press junkets or targeted advertising. The record existed as a commercial object without the machinery that commercial objects needed to reach people in a crowded, noisy marketplace. In America in 1967, What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong sold fewer than 1,000 copies. It was a ghost of a release, floating through the record shops, unnoticed and unheard, ignored by the very people who were hungry for something authentic but didn't know where to look. In England, it was different. The British release was handled separately, and someone there made the decision to actually promote it. The song reached #1 on the UK charts. It was a genuine hit, not a niche success, not a jazz success, but a popular music success. The kind of thing that reached people who did not consider themselves jazz listeners and found something in it that they didn't have a category for. It traveled through the airwaves of Europe, touching lives in a way that defied the logic of the American boardroom. Armstrong heard about the British success. He was glad of it, a quiet satisfaction for a man who had long ago learned that recognition was a fickle, often delayed friend. He was also, by various accounts, philosophical about the American failure. He had been through enough commercial experiences to know that what a record company decided to do with a record and what the record actually was were two entirely separate things. The song was good. He knew it was good. He had known it the moment he read the sheet music. He saw the structure, the simplicity, and the profound, aching sincerity of the words. He didn't need the validation of a chart position to understand the inherent truth of the melody. The session itself is documented as having been done with exceptional efficiency. Armstrong was in his 60s, his voice carrying the weight and depth that decades of trumpet playing and singing had given it, a quality of texture and lived experience that no younger voice could have produced. When he stood in that studio, the air seemed to settle around him. He wasn't just a singer, he was a witness. He sang it once. The people in the room knew they had it. The engineers, the producers, the session musicians, they all felt the shift. It was a moment of crystalline perfection. He sang it perhaps a few more times for safety, just to be sure, but the soul of the track was there in that first take. But the essential recording, the one that would eventually become one of the most recognized recordings in the history of American music, was produced in a session of a few hours. It was the culmination of a life, yet it felt as effortless as a breath. He died on July 6, 971. What a Wonderful World had been a British hit and an American commercial failure. In America, in 971, it was not what Louis Armstrong was remembered for. It was a side note, something he had recorded near the end of his career that had done well overseas, a curious footnote in an otherwise legendary bibliography of recordings. It hadn't become the anthem he was destined to leave behind. It was still hidden, waiting for the world to catch up to the frequency he had been broadcasting all along. Then, in 1987, the film Good Morning Vietnam used it on its soundtrack. The director Barry Levinson placed it over footage of the war's devastation. Beautiful music laid against images of destruction. The contrast between what the song said and what the images showed, creating something that neither element could have produced alone. The sweetness of the voice against the bitterness of the reality. It was a jarring, haunting juxtaposition that forced an entire generation to finally stop and listen. The song was re-released. This time, in America, it went to number 1, 16 years after Armstrong recorded it, 12 years after he died. A man who had been told the market didn't exist for his song lived his entire remaining life without knowing what the song would eventually mean to the country that had refused to hear it. It is one of those facts that sits in a specific way. It lingers in the back of the mind, a reminder of how we often fail to recognize genius when it is standing right in front of us. Armstrong spent 69 years making music. He received, across those years, enormous recognition, critical, commercial, international. He had number 1 hits. He had adoring crowds on 5 continents. He had the knowledge, which he had earned, that he had done something real and lasting. But What a Wonderful World was different from all of it. Not because it was technically his greatest achievement, it wasn't. Because it said something in 3 minutes that everything else said across a lifetime. About the world being worth loving despite everything that makes it hard to love. About the roses and the skies and the people saying hello. About the fragile, resilient nature of hope in a world that often seems designed to crush it. About choosing to see what is beautiful because the alternative is to see only what is not. And Louis Armstrong had decided a long time ago which way to look. He didn't just sing the lyrics. He occupied them. He infused them with the resilience of a man who had faced the shadows and walked toward the light. He did not write the song. He did not compose the melody. But he sang it the way he sang everything, with a voice that had been shaped by everything he had lived, and what he had lived was considerable. The joy in the recording is not performed. It is not a commercial calculation. It is the authentic voice of a man who had been born in poverty, who had been through Jim Crow and mob connections and decades of being dismissed and called irrelevant, who had played for kings and recorded with every significant musician of his era, who had loved the world imperfectly and been loved by it imperfectly in return. That man sang, "I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you." And in those simple words, he was speaking to the possibility of a better existence, even if he was the only one who saw it at the time. Larry Newton said the market didn't exist. He was right about 1967. He was wrong about everything else. He was wrong about the nature of a human heart, which doesn't change with the passing of trends or the shifting of demographics. He was wrong about the staying power of a voice that speaks with absolute, unwavering truth. The song has been played at weddings and funerals, serving as a bridge between the beginning and the end. It has been played for children who have no idea who Louis Armstrong was, imprinting itself on their minds as a lullaby for a hopeful future. It has been played in hospitals and on radio stations in countries Armstrong never visited, bridging language barriers and cultural divides with its simple, universal plea for kindness. It plays somewhere in the world every hour of every day. It will be playing an hour from now when this is over. It will be playing tomorrow as the sun rises over cities and landscapes he could never have imagined. A man recorded it in an afternoon in 1967 and was told nobody wanted it. He carried that rejection with the quiet dignity of a man who knew his own worth, even if the world wasn't ready to acknowledge it yet. The executives, the accountants, the skeptics, they all looked at the bottom line and missed the point entirely. They looked at the past and tried to project it onto the future, forgetting that some things are timeless. Some melodies are woven into the very fabric of our shared consciousness. Everybody wanted it. They just didn't know it yet. They needed the world to get harder. They needed the shadows to grow longer. And they needed to feel the weight of their own existence before they could fully hear the promise in his voice. They needed to learn how to see the roses again, and they needed a guide who had already learned the lesson the hard way. Louis Armstrong was that guide. He didn't need the applause to prove he was right. He had his trumpet, he had his voice, and he had the knowledge that in the end, love is the only thing that really matters. He didn't need the validation of a boardroom to know that he had captured something essential, something that would outlive the label, the industry, the politics, and the people who tried to keep it silent. He understood, in a way that only those who have truly lived can understand, that beauty is not a luxury. It is a necessity. It is the oxygen that keeps the soul alive when the rest of the world is suffocating. He didn't sing for the charts. He sang for the people who were struggling to find a reason to smile in a world that often gave them every reason to cry. And long after those executives are forgotten, long after the business models of 1967 have turned to dust, that voice remains. It is the sound of a man looking at a difficult world and deciding, with every fiber of his being, to see the wonder in it. That is the gift he left us, a legacy of sight, a way to look at the trees of green and the red roses and understand that, even if for only a few minutes, we are part of something magnificent. We are part of a world that is worth loving. We are part of a chorus that stretches across time, reaching out from the grave to tell us that everything is going to be all right, as long as we choose to keep looking for the light. It is a simple song. It is a quiet song. But it carries the weight of a life, the depth of a soul, and the absolute, irrefutable truth that beauty will always find a way to be heard. It didn't matter what Larry Newton thought. It didn't matter what the market demanded in 1967. It only mattered that Louis Armstrong walked into a studio, closed his eyes, and sang about a wonderful world. And in that moment, he made it one, for himself and for all of us. The song lives on, a testament to the fact that sometimes the things that go unnoticed are the very things that define us the most. It is the voice that stays when everything else fades. It is the melody that plays when the noise of the world finally falls quiet. It is the truth, spoken in the simple language of a man who knew that, despite all the pain and the struggle, there is still, and will always be, beauty to be found, if we only have the courage to look for it. And he had that courage. He had it in spades. He lived it, he sang it, and he left it to us to carry forward into the unknown. Every time we hear that gravelly, warm, inviting voice, we are reminded of our own capacity to wonder, to love, and to believe in a better day. That is the true power of music. That is the true power of Louis Armstrong. And that is why, an hour from now, someone, somewhere, will be listening to it, and they will feel exactly what he wanted them to feel. The world is waiting, and it is listening. It always was. It just needed time to hear the message clearly. And now the message is everywhere. The song is playing. The world is turning. And somewhere the trees of green are blooming, just as he said they would.